Shalom Chaverim, welcome to lesson 25 of Learn Biblical Hebrew. In this lesson and the next two, we'll look at some interesting verses out of the book of Ecclesiastes. Today we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 2, and in lesson 26 we'll look at verse 9, and then in lesson 27 we'll look at chapter 7 verse 1. In Ecclesiastes, in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon answers some questions that sit in the back of everyone's mind. Well, every man's mind. Let's start with, what would it be like if I could have sex with any woman I wanted? What would it be like if I could get anything I wanted? Well, Solomon was in a position to get all these things, and he found them, contrary to what people might expect, in the end quite unsatisfactory. So it's just interesting that he was a man who was in a position to take anything he wanted, and so he tried it out, and then he wrote this book as a result of saying, okay, what is the result? Did these things deliver what they promised? Just another interesting point about, there are three books in the Old Testament that are called wisdom books. There is Ecclesiastes, Job, and Proverbs. We can say that Job is a passionate discussion of the question whether the divine judgment of the world, the divine government of the world, is just. Proverbs ignores that question and confines itself to cheery practical suggestions for the conduct of everyday life, while Ecclesiastes treats life as a logically and ethically insoluble riddle and advises a moderate and wise enjoyment of its good things. Those comments are taken from a commentary written by a man named Toy. Another suggestion by a man called Rabbi Jonathan assumes that Solomon wrote all these three books: Song of Songs in his lusty youth, Proverbs in his wise middle age, and Ecclesiastes in his disappointed old age. So that's the difference between those three books: Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes written in his disappointed old age. So here we have it, Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 2. These are famous words, well known to many people, particularly through the King James Version. So it's very interesting to be able to study them in the original Hebrew and see what we can learn. Havel Havalim Amar Kohelet. Havel Havalim Hakol Havel. So this verse here in Hebrew is 8 words long, and 5 of the words are the same. Havel, Havelim. Notice that the vowels change a little bit just because of the form of the word, but it is still the same basic word with the same 3 consonants, and it's here, 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 and here. So let's just look at the letter by letter translation, which is there, and now the word by word translation. So Havel basically means breath. So that's how I've translated it here, breath of breaths. This is what's called a construct chain. So that's why the of, I'll put the of in bracket, it's the Hebrew way of saying of. Then Amar means said, and Kohelet means preacher. Haval Havalim repeats exactly these first 2 words. Hakol Havel. So the all breath, and there's no is. So in English we would have to supply that. So here's my translation. Pointless, said the preacher. Pointless, pointless. Everything is pointless. So it's interesting to note the different meanings of this word. Here I translated breath, and here I translated pointless. In the King James Bible, it's translated vanity, so that's the expression that's now become well known. Vanity of vanities, said the preacher. All is vanity. But the basic meaning of it, if you like, the first approximation meaning of it is breath. So then it extends to mean transitory, because a breath, of course, is very short-lived. And then it extends again to mean like pointless or futile, because being so short-lived. So that's why I've translated here pointless, and other translations use similar words. But notice how the word itself suggests a breath with the h sound, suggesting breath. And then we notice that the h sound is repeated in other words as well. It's repeated here, and it's repeated here as well. Notice how also the L sound is also repeated in these words. So that's also contributing to part of it. Oh, another point about Havel, this is actually Abel. This is actually Abel's name, Abel, who we meet in the opening chapters of Genesis. The H got lost coming into English because it came to us through Latin, which has no H. Abel's life was very short, and the preacher is saying that likewise everything is soon swept away, and so everything is transitory and hence pointless. It's a favorite word with Solomon, assuming he was the author of Ecclesiastes. He uses it again in chapter 1 verse 14, where it's linked with chasing the wind. In fact, the word occurs 71 times in the Old Testament and 36 of these in Ecclesiastes. And so it can be translated in various different ways. We could translate it unfulfilling, unfair, or transitory. Now just a word about Koheleth, translated preacher, speaker, teacher, orator, or philosopher even perhaps. The Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible done about 200 BC, translated Ecclesiastes. That's where we get the name of this book, Ecclesiastes. But in Greek, Ecclesiastes meant teacher or preacher. It comes from the Greek word ekklesia, which means church or congregation. So the Ecclesiastes was the speaker or the leader of the assembly. So that's where we get the name of this book, from the Greek translation of this word Koheleth. Here I've translated it as preacher. The CEV, Contemporary English Version, translates this verse like this: nothing makes sense, everything is nonsense. I've seen it all, nothing makes sense. And here's my suggestion: pointless, said the preacher. Pointless, pointless. Everything is pointless. So there, Solomon's despair, perhaps in his cynical old age, well expressed in these words of Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 2.